I'm Cito Beltran, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here with you. I would just like to point out that the third episode of today's presentation is very special because it's about social infrastructure. It's about giving back, and yet at the same time, getting something in return. And we will delve into that deeper later, but at this point, I would like to introduce a person of honor, our guest speaker, if I might say, a presenter. But more than that, some of you may have noticed how approachable he is. He has been a tested local executive, someone I know personally who doesn't lose his cool even if I criticize him in the papers. He just gets even with me by taking me aside. Anyway, it's truly an honor to be in the same room with the Honorable Vice President of the Republic of the Philippines. Please welcome His Excellency Vice President Jejomar Binay.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mr. Cito Beltran. Fellow panelists, Honorable Enrique Ona, Secretary of the Department of Health, Honorable Francisco Varela, Undersecretary, Department of Education, Honorable Eileen Riego Javier, Executive Director, National Kidney and Transplant Institute, Dr. Sergio Cao, President, Ms. Cosette Canilao, Executive Director, Public-Private Partnership Center, participants to the seminar Building Infrastructure Driving Growth, Public-Private Partnership as a Catalyst for Transformation, fellow workers in government, friends from the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I thank the conveners of the 45th Annual Meeting of the ADB's Board of Governors, particularly the Public-Private Partnership Center of the Philippines, for inviting me to be a panelist in today's discussion. Social infrastructure investment is essential to developing socially inclusive and environmentally attractive settlements. In addition, it contributes to the development of human capital, worker productivity, and ultimately, economic health. Within the country's development agenda, investment in housing plays a profound role, most especially in job generation. The construction of one housing unit creates work for at least 8 persons. And for every 100 new jobs in the construction industry, another 18 jobs are generated in other sectors. Housing investment also helps unlock dead capital and stimulates local property taxes. Over time, it builds household wealth by appreciating in value and providing a base for income-generating activities while opening the door to credit. As the chairman of the Philippines Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, or HUDC, I wish to focus on the public and private partnerships potential for scaling up affordable housing in the Philippines and giving Filipino families, the underprivileged above all, a dignified life. The Philippine context. By 2030, the urban population of the Philippines is estimated to hit 96 million, with 3 of every 4 Filipinos living in urban areas. At present, the informal settlements in our cities remind us of the supply-demand imbalance in basic urban services, infrastructure, and housing. It is this knot that we seek to untie, and in this goal, the participation of the private sector is of paramount importance. If properly structured, public-private partnership projects can accelerate the provision of poor and low-income housing. Beyond arresting urban poverty, this breaks ground for new towns and cities to be established outside the usual urban hubs, thus rationalizing the pace of urbanization. What is this enabling environment? The law sets the stage for this cooperation to take place. Our Urban Development and Housing Act, also known as UDHA, charges the state to carry out a comprehensive urban development and housing program in cooperation with the private sector to uplift the living conditions of the homeless and the underprivileged. Furthermore, the PPP framework is guided by President Aquino's 16-point agenda, the social contract with the Filipino people, which makes clear that the Philippines' national development objective is to achieve inclusive growth and reduce poverty. And therefore, at this point, let me share with you our experience on PPP modalities and emerging deal structures. Good laws are a necessary foundation, but the true test of resolve occurs when the rubber finally meets the road, as the saying goes. Film proof of how PPP can change the housing sector was gained in the development of Poor Urban Communities Sector Project. With ADB extending the funding, HUDC worked with local government units, the Development Bank of the Philippines, microfinance institutions, community-based organizations, and private developers to encourage PPPs across the scope of socialized housing. This gave life to 3 PPP transaction structures which shift the responsibility of securing project financing to the private sector. The first entails the packaging by the local government of socialized housing projects and for private sector implementation. Through open bidding, the local government grants rights to a proponent who finances, develops, constructs, and manages a mixed-use housing development built on local government unit land. And to liquefy the developer, the Home Development Mutual Fund, or PAG-IBIG, a strong and vibrant fund owned by its members but managed by the government, provides end-user financing. The second structure focuses on private sector initiative. Privately owned land is developed, marketed, and managed solely by the private sector. And the national and local governments support the endeavor through the critical tasks of granting permits and licenses, and through the delivery of basic municipal services and identification of target market communities. The third structure builds on the strength of microfinance institutions. And in this modality, a local government develops the site and on its own or through a contractor builds the housing unit. A bank or non-bank microfinance institution then offers appropriate housing microfinance products and services to enable the target beneficiaries to purchase the plots and units developed by the city or municipal governments. In the aftermath of Typhoon Sandong in southern Philippines, another multi-stakeholder framework emerged. Local government units, the national government, and the private sector, like businesses, academia, and others, contributed resources such as land or funds for site development and the building of houses. The construction was undertaken by non-government organizations such as Habitat for Humanity or Gawad Kalinga, organizations who also generate construction funds from their private funds and partners. And what are the further improvement in the enabling environment? Further acceleration of PPP investments and framework of cooperation can be realized if a correspondingly investment-friendly business climate exists and strong private sector support in mass housing is both encouraged and safeguarded. Tax incentives are already provided by law, and we will support this with non-tax incentives such as reducing red tape in the processing of housing loans, registration and issuance of land titles, and housing permits. We continue to work with local government units to review and simplify processes in the issuance of development permits so that fewer barriers exist to private sector investment. I remember, and probably this is the result of my more than 20 years of mayor of the city of Makati, I always say, for you to be successful in any project, it must be done by both and the private sectors. Idle and underutilized government-proclaimed lands are available to private entities for development as part of our asset reform program. A portion of the land may be developed for commercial purposes, and part of the proceeds shall be used as enabling components for the development of socialized and low-cost housing, all at no cost to government. And in order to make housing units affordable, a usufructuary arrangement shall be adopted as an alternative mode of disposition to intended beneficiaries. This shelter strategy will reduce cost by eliminating the price of land from the cost of housing development. And therefore, our vision is to provide not only decent and affordable housing for the common Filipino, but to nurture communities that are sustainable and resilient to climate change. Our progress thus far is only the opening act. The combined strength of government and the private sector, harnessed by a common novel vision, will help us bring this effort to a very successful close. Thank you very much. Good day and mabuhay.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. May we ask you to take the center seat on stage. And at this point, I would like to check if you actually know the people beside you. Those who fail the test will be asked to vacuum the floor. Anyway, actually, allow me to introduce the other panelists to join our Vice President. May I call upon the current Secretary of the Department of Health, Secretary Enrique Ona. Another representative from the health sector is the Executive Director of the National Kidney and Transplant Institute, Dr. Eileen Riego Javier. We have also invited the Undersecretary for Finance and Administration of the Department of Education. Please welcome Undersecretary Francisco Varela. To complete our panelists is the former Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, and he actually has the credit for engineering, if I may say, what is now called the Ayala Techno Hub at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. May I introduce Dr. Sergio Cao. And finally, I think it is only fair that we call upon our host today. She has been avoiding exposure, taking credit for it, but since I love to break the rules, I would like to introduce to you the Executive Director for the PPP, none other than Cosette Canilao. Ever a gentleman, Mr. Vice President is taking care of Cosette. Okay, let's get the ball rolling. Perhaps I should start with Dr. Cao. Dr. Cao, you've been given, or Cosette was telling me that you were part of the team that engineered the development of the Ayala Techno Hub at UP Diliman. I remember that area as I think it was a golf course or a driving range. It was a place for folk songs, but largely unused, undeveloped. Could you please share with us how you initiated that massive program, which is now an example for PPP in education?
Thank you. First, the golf course that you were referring to is not the place now where the Ayala Techno Hub is. It's inside the campus. The Science and Technology Park that was developed, the first phase initially by Ayala Land Incorporated, is a 38-hectare property along Commonwealth Avenue. And the decision of the university to engage the private sector to develop the area is because it's mindful that government, in particular the state university, does not have the capability to develop the area. And therefore, we turn to the private sector. We actually had 2 failed biddings for that project. And after 2 failed biddings, we had negotiated a transaction which also failed. The first one failed because there were only 2 big developers that decided to participate, but one of them withdrew. Until finally, we were able to sign an agreement with Ayala Land Incorporated for the development of a Science and Technology Park. This is consistent with the objective of the University of the Philippines to provide a framework and venue for academe-industry collaboration. Because we believe that we must have a critical mass of scientific manpower, because that will be the trigger, one of the triggers for economic development. And because we have a very strong College of Science, College of Engineering, and other applied disciplines, we had to provide a venue for our faculty members and researchers to collaborate with R&D departments of IT and IT-enabled companies. And that is what was achieved by the Ayala UP Techno Hub.
Dr. Crow, you're speaking about educational benefits for the institution, but in terms of the investors, in terms of the would-be partners, of some of whom are here, most people have the stigma that when you partner with public education, with health, with housing in the Philippines, it's not a surefire deal, it's a very tedious process, and it's not profitable. Has it been profitable in terms of currency? Has it been profitable for UP and for Ayala?
I think that is the main reason why we had 2 failed biddings. Developers are not very sure if they can recover their investments. Secondly, it's also very difficult to deal with government. I'm sure many of you experienced that. Very difficult. We had to make sure that we subscribe to the provisions of the procurement law, and therefore, even if after 2 failed biddings, even the negotiated transactions was along the lines of the procurement law. But in the end, it is, I think, a financial decision by Ayala. I'm sure.
So it's safe to say it's profitable.
It's profitable.
Okay, I'd like to go to the Vice President. Sir, you've said you've been in public as an executive, a mayor of Makati for 20 years, and you are now Vice President. Is it just the mindset, or is it a lack of understanding or appreciation of government, or is it really difficult and unprofitable?
No, I think there is no issue on the profitability, Sito. I think it's always a question of the necessary appropriation. Believe it or not, I think it was during the time of President Estrada that we had a bigger share. I think we had 4 point something. And then it went down to 2, 3, and something like that. So I was just talking with Secretary Purisima this morning. Do you know that as we grow in our GDP by 5, the bigger portion of that increase is due to housing? Number 1. Number 2, we need to produce 3.6 million housing units. And this is where we need a lot of capitalization for purposes of putting these housing units.
Okay, I noticed in your presentation and in the slides that were presented, The private sector, upper class developers are doing mixed use with shopping malls. It's all lifestyle driven. When you compare the housing for lower income, it's all row houses. Is it really a mindset that investors need to change, like develop a town more than housing?
Well, if you have to put single detached houses, it will be cheaper. But we'll be moving towards the direction of putting up medium-rise buildings. Although it's a little expensive, but at least you're able to maximize the land for wherein you're going to put all these housing units.
Okay, so you're geared more for medium rise.
That's right. That's right. Especially for Metro Manila, particularly.
Okay, Secretary Ona, you at one point headed the National Kidney Transplant Institute. You're now Secretary of Health, and there's talk about public-private partnership, social infrastructure. What areas are immediately available for possible partners and investors?
I think it's both in the major regional medical centers that we have, and even in our specialty hospitals, as well as in the provincial and district hospitals where public-private partnership, I think, is very viable and feasible. And I think it's very important for the public to understand the intricacies of this relationship, because indeed it involves not only the infrastructure, but it also involves the management of the staff, meaning the medical staff, as well as suppliers of equipments and other medical and even medicines. So I think it's a fairly complex combination of these factors that must be understood. But certainly there is a very wide area of cooperation between the public sector and government and the private sector to make sure that indeed this partnership is advantageous to both at the end of the day.
Okay, you have to forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm asking about profitability here, because that seems to be a big question right now. Is social infrastructure investment a profitable thing? There were a lot of people commenting on that. I'd like to ask you, Undersecretary Varela, you're developing many projects in Region 1. And schools, public schools, that's the last thing I would imagine as a profitable project to undertake. Maybe housing, maybe hospitals, but public schools?
Thank you, Sito. In the case of our PSIP, PPP for schools infrastructure project at present, this is in a way a hybrid PPP in the sense that the private proponent is not really taking any significant market risk. So this is a transaction where they will build the houses, the classrooms, and then lease these classrooms over a 10-year period to the Department of Education. So subject to the delivery of classrooms according to the agreed specifications and subject to compliance with certain periodic maintenance commitments, then the private proponent would be assured of the lease payments from government over this 10-year period. So it will be a profitable investment on the part of the private proponent, otherwise they would not be bidding those lease payments, which is what will be the subject for the bidding. So that is what we have now for PSIP. We actually have an older PPP program in DepEd, which is what we call the Education Service Contracting Program. This is actually a more involved PPP, wherein the government partially pays for the tuition of some of our students in private high schools. So it surprises a lot of people when you tell them that about 700,000 of our private high school students, half of total enrollment in our private high schools, receive this tuition subsidy from government. And that is also a profitable arrangement for private schools. It allows them to keep their students who otherwise, without this subsidy, many of them would actually go to the public schools. It is a partial subsidy because the schools would still define their respective tuition fees. We pay outside Metro Manila only 5,500. The schools would still set their own tuition fees, and the families pay for the difference. But without that subsidy from government, many of the students would go back to the public schools.
Going back to infrastructure, do you have a successful business model in terms of public school in PPP projects?
Well, what we are currently implementing at the moment is the first phase of this program. At present, we just finished the pre-qualification stage where 6 interested proponents have been pre-qualified. We had this a few weeks ago, and the scheduled bidding for the 3 regions, Region 1, Region 3, and Region 4A would be sometime in July. So we're crossing our fingers, and we hope that we will have a successful implementation of the first phase. And based on this experience, we want to follow through with additional phases in other parts of the country.
Okay, I'd like to go to Dr. Riego. You are with the NKTI, and what is your experience with social infrastructure PPPs?
I'm very fortunate to be here. The initiator of a lot of our PPP schemes, the National Kidney and Transplant Institute, is right here with us, Secretary Ona, who was the past executive director. So he initiated the first model for PPP with the assistance of the Build, Operate, Transfer Center of the Department of Trade and Industry way back in 2002. And we were able to expand our services in the hemodialysis center with state-of-the-art technology, increased our efficiency at affordable cost. Actually, our patients were able to, at all levels, our pay and service patients were given the same quality treatment in dialysis. And we were able to plow back for expanding our infrastructure with whatever margins we had.
Do you have repeat customers, meaning who invested in one facility and are now back for new projects or expansions?
We haven't been able to have other PPP schemes, such as providing the stone treatment, lithotripsy, and we have also the laboratory automated system that we were having. We, as a national referral and reference laboratory, we have the state-of-the-art technology in laboratory medicine.
Okay. Cosette, I'd like to give you the opportunity because there's a lot said and yet there's not enough done as far as engagement is concerned between government and private sector. What do you see are the mental stumbling blocks or the stigmas or the problems that people need to overcome?
Well, actually, I'm going to talk about PPPs in general. We've received a lot of feedback from the private sector, and they're very enthusiastic about the PPP projects, and we are gratified actually by the interest that they've shown, not only for the traditional infrastructure projects, but also for social infra. I think we know what the infrastructure deficiencies of the countries are, and also what the problems of the countries are in terms of social infrastructure. And we are working together to achieve the acceleration of the delivery of public services.
Any particular problems or stumbling block that people need to overcome?
Well, I think there are some thoughts or ideas that since this is social infra, they think that the private sector will not have reasonable returns from these projects. But we are ensuring that, of course, we know that the private sector would go into this for profit as well. And by structuring the projects properly and engaging them in the structuring, then we can arrive at a project structure that's acceptable to both the government as well as the private sector.
I noticed, Mr. Vice President, you were nodding your head, and you mentioned there's a shortage of 3.2 million houses.
3.6 as of the 2010 data.
Is there something that you'd like? Because in my mind, there's so much land as far as local governments are concerned. There's maybe 1,000 times that in terms of informal settlers. But and you're one of the mayors who pioneered in this medium-rise housing projects. How come there are not that many people jumping at the opportunity nationwide?
No, I think there are a lot of would-be buyers, as you know.
Developers, sir. Excuse me. The builders that develop PPP projects.
That's true, but the developers would be on demand basis. Will there be a lot of buyers? Will there be a lot of occupants? So what we need is to provide already the units, and there's certainly a market for them. So in which case, incidentally, under the UDHA law, the principal or the primary responsibility for housing would be the local governments. So we have called their attention about this matter, and I will tell you, and I suppose you'll be surprised if I tell you that many local governments never included in their development plans matters on housing.
Mm-hmm. And
Hardly
I
would
think
you
we
find.
have some legislators here in the audience who should be addressing that in their legislative agenda. So whoever you are, please take note.
No, in fairness, in fairness to our legislators, it's at the level of the local governments. There's already the law, there's the Urban and the Development Housing Act. It's only in this particular act that states the primary responsibility for housing is to the local governments.
Okay. How easy or how convenient is it? Secretary Ona, you spearheaded the expansion of the NKTI, National Kidney Transplant Institute. Some people did a job on you, trying to accuse you of corruption, trying to accuse you of having so much power. And yet at the end, your success there actually earned you the position of Secretary of Health. How did you make it easy for the investors?
Well, let me put it this way. Healthcare is something that most, probably not many investors are very wary. And the reason for that is because, at least in the Philippines, there has always been the thought that as far as the poor is concerned, national government should take care of them. And that those in essentially the formal sector should go to the private hospital. And that has been the status of the health system in the country today. And of course, that has resulted in a situation wherein mostly the informal sector, as much as 25% of our people were really not able to access a reasonable, much less than affordable health care. And that has been the essence of our President's first message to us, or to at least to me, to make sure that this 33% of the Filipinos who indeed either get sick or even die without even seeing a health worker has to be corrected. And of course, all over the world today, especially not only in the developed, but certainly in the developing world, the issue of universal health care, which means making sure that all people, not just only those belonging to the formal sector, but especially those that have been overlooked, be really included in a capacity for them to access reasonable care. And the reason for that is really healthcare is in essence, a human right. And it is very clear, as a matter of fact, Mr. Blair, then former Prime Minister of UK, even mentioned that there is no way that we can improve healthcare or put universal healthcare without really the participation of the private sector. And I think what we have shown in a very small way is that in either, not necessarily in a whole hospital, but certainly in aspects of services. It may be, let's say, in a dialysis program, or in radiology equipments, or even, for example, in setting up a medical arts building or offices within a hospital system. All of these are opportunities for the private sector to partner with the government.
Okay, I'd just like to add to that. If you're considering partnering in healthcare, the NKTI did not have the reputation it has now. Back then, it was kind of fuzzy. People were only going to go there for a kidney problem. Now, I would personally stay there. My mom stays there because as they upgraded the facilities, the middle class started following suit because it was a more affordable and viable choice and option. At this stage, I'd like to bring it to the floor. Is there anybody in the floor who has a particular interest or would like to ask a question? Because I'm really getting tired of hogging the limelight.
Sito,
So-
Sito.
Yes, sir.
Before somebody stands up to ask a question, can it be just go back to what I stated a while ago? There is your demand over there. And I'm just reminded of the OFW sector. We have millions of OFWs. And on the basis of the survey, 3 basic reasons why we have a lot of OFWs. Firstly, increase of food. Number 2, helping the siblings in their educational needs. And number 3 is to help and for them to own their own house.
Okay.
So that's where you are. Number 2, your OFWs, well, because of the campaign we had undertaken, we were able to enroll more than 1 million last year. Because under the law, it's mandatory and compulsory for them to be members. The only thing was that for them to be benefited with a program on housing loan through the Pag-ibig. And finally, we have a lot of rentals, lessees. The moment you explain to them, if you have to pay a monthly rental of 2,000, do you know that you can own a house and that worth at 350,000 pesos? Cheap. Then if you have to pay a rental of 5,000 pesos, teachers, among others, here in the urban areas, you hardly could find apartments now for 5,000. And yet for 5,000, you can own a house worth 750,000. That will be about 25 to 30 years to pay. So you have your market.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Cao?
Yeah, Sito, you mentioned about profitability and repeat order. No? Maybe I should mention that an indication that the Ayala Techno Hub is successful is that before the end of 2010, the University of the Philippines also bidded out the UP Integrated School area. It's just a 10-hectare property on the other side of the campus. And this time, there were 3 big developers, Ayala, SM, and Robinson, that joined the bidding. And it was won by Ayala Land again. No? But the point is they would not have joined the second time if they did not have profit in the first project. I should say that the more than 110 state universities and colleges in the Philippines, many of them are land grants universities. UP alone has 23,000 hectares of land grants. And these are real properties that are just waiting for the proper developer to approach the state universities to help the state universities generate resources that will help them support academic programs and initiatives. Having said that, it is of course difficult to have these projects where the other party is education, health, and housing, because it's social infrastructure. So how much profit do you really want? No?
Okay, before I call Secretary Ona, I think there are two congressmen in the floor, and I have a reputation for getting them into trouble. You already heard about local government officials not joining the process or engaging their properties.
The challenge really is how to attract private business sector into the work of government, particularly on social infrastructure. And I can understand where UP is coming from. It's basically developing the area to commercial areas so that you can attract investors to get into like UP Techno Hub and the UP integrated system. I guess if that government entity has a land, then this is something that private sector can go into. But I'd like to understand better from the viewpoint of health. My wife is also a nephrologist, that's why, and she is a practicing nephro in Mindoro. She opened her own dialysis center there. But I'm having a lot of problems, especially when she treats patients, and it's quite expensive, and I end up subsidizing the cost because they're my constituents. But how do you get in the private sector? Like, of course, when you say NKTI, you have a land, you can develop, you can offer it to developers, then bingo, you can attract investors. But in a place like ours in Mindoro, that is not a model that can be adopted. And so, what kind of model can you suggest for private business to get into healthcare delivery in a rural setting?
I'd like actually first to comment on so-called the profitability of those investing, let's say, on health. Let me just give you an example, again, using the patients with kidney failure. About 10,000 Filipinos develop end-stage renal failure annually, about 10,000. And they can continue living if either they are able to get a dialysis regularly. Lifespan would be essentially not necessarily normal, but certainly is long enough, and or transplantation. So dialysis is a very important aspect of continuing life in this particular group of patients. Now, there are about 4 major suppliers of dialysis machines and goods in the Philippines. And I said, when we made all the necessary feasibility study as well as their profitability, if they partner with us at the National Kidney and Transplant Institute about 10 years ago, I said that if we are successful in this, essentially, the one who will win will probably control 60 or 70% of the dialysis program in the country. And sure indeed, he now is the top. Now, so in short, it became profitable for him. The next question really is, how can it be sustained, I guess, on a national level? And that's why it's very important to go into what we call now universal healthcare or kalusugang pangkalahatan, which means that all Filipinos must have health insurance, and our national health insurance is through PhilHealth, because that will be the source of the funding. But it is important, as I said, that each and every Filipino gets to have that health insurance. And in the Philippines, our law is very clear. Since 1995, when PhilHealth law was passed, it was very clear that all Filipinos are compelled. It's compulsory that within the next 15 years, which meant actually that by 2010, all of us should have been enrolled with PhilHealth. Unfortunately, barely half of the Filipinos were enrolled. And that's essentially why it's very, very important that the program of health insurance through PhilHealth, through a national health insurance, is indeed understood not only by our government, by our legislator, but certainly by the public. Because that, as I said, will be the revenue stream. And this is essentially what's happening all over the world today.
Okay, and I think Congressman Umali, the best solution to your problem is to relocate your clinic to another congressional district. You being a congressman does not make your wife's business profitable. Okay, here's another question. Who else have questions? So I can go to you later. One here, anyone else there? Foreigners, watch out, I got my eye on you.
My name is Edward Alcordo from the Australian-Philippine Business Council. So we represent primarily in Australian investors to the Philippines, and we're quite keen on this PPP. We've been following it since November. Two questions, in fact. First to, I think, the Undersecretary Valera. So in your mind, sir, you were talking about profitability. What is the internal rate of return that you think would be acceptable for your PPP in education? Is it within the range of 8 to 12%, or is it within the range of, let's say, 12 to 15? And are you market-driven in the sense that will you just, after it gets above 15%, say it's a failed bid, and so therefore people like us, where we pay bidding money, then we obviously lose our bidding money? The second question, I guess, if I could just also say it now, is directed to the lady, Ms. Canilao. So what is the rate of tenders, in the sense that do you have PPP tenders every quarter or every month? I guess our investors are looking for packages of about $1 billion and above. How long does it take to get to that rate?
Undersecretary?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, we are market-driven. We started this project looking forward to a successful implementation. Obviously, it is not in the interest of government to just start the process, collect the bidding fees, and then have the project fail. So we are always market-driven. We obviously try to refine our estimates to make sure that government will not overpay, but we are conscious of the need to make sure that our parameters are set in a way that would allow us to solicit several bids from as many proponents as possible. So with respect to the question of financing, we have talked to the proponents, we have talked to potential funders, and we're looking at models in terms of financing, possible financing structures, and we are estimating what would be the likely funding cost for our proponents.